Hello, thanks for tuning in. So this is my, I suppose, review of the podcast Alex O'Connor and Jordan Peterson. So I believe that Alex went over to, anyway, across the Atlantic to to sit with Jordan Peterson, and they spent 2 hours talking. The interview is on Jordan Peterson's website. There's a link below if you want to go and watch the whole thing. So look, I've just made some notes here, and I'm just going to talk and try and go through some of the main points, what I found good, what I didn't find so good about the conversation. So, Alex has made videos about Jordan Peterson before. I remember, I think he made one on what did he call it? The sophistry of Jordan Peterson, where I thought he broke down quite well how Jordan Peterson avoids, by various techniques, avoids answering questions and being precise enough so that people can understand what his position is on various topics, most notably on the existence of God. I was really hoping that Alex would come along and find a way of getting through Peterson's, I think, fairly deliberately dishonest strategies that he uses to avoid answering this question. I've got ideas about why he does it. I think that he's got quite a big Christian fan base who he doesn't want to upset. So it's very difficult to get a straight answer out of him. He teases Christians a lot by saying, well, you know, the resurrection, it couldn't really have happened because it's impossible, but I'm afraid that it did. Or, I've got this fear inside me that it really did happen. And so he's continually teasing Christians. And who the hell cares? Who cares whether Jordan Peterson believes that the resurrection happened or not? I think he gets far too much attention. But nevertheless, why do I care? Probably only because I wanted to see how Alex would fare. And I wish I could say that he fared better than I expected that he would. I don't really think that he did because he spoke to him for 2 hours, and I think he let him. I think he let him off the hook a number of times. So let's just go through some of the kind of points when. So I mean, Alex went straight to it and said, I mean, after an absolutely ridiculous 5 minute conversation on, you know, why did you call yourself a cosmic skeptic? I mean, okay, let's forget about that. I mean, why would that be relevant? Okay, so yeah, so Alex did ask Jordan Peterson, do you believe that God actually really exists? Is not just a metaphor, is not just symbolic, that we don't just live our lives as if a God does exist, but that a God really, and so in some way, do you believe that a God exists? And then, of course, Peterson went straight to, well, what do we mean by belief? Okay, no more Peterson expressions. That was dreadful. But yeah, what do we mean by belief? I mean, I've heard him saying in response to the question, "Do you believe in God?" I've heard him actually saying, in order to answer this question, we have to ask, "What do you mean by do? What do we mean by you?" Well, then I could go to him and say, "Well, what do you mean by what?" Um, and you could keep going back and chasing meaning all over the place. It's like if you pick up a dictionary and you look up a word and you think, oh, there's the meaning of this word, discussion, and you look up, yep, okay, so that's what it means. Normally, a dialogue between two or more people, and then you think, well, wait a minute, what do those words mean? And you go and you look up those words. You're chasing meaning around in a circle all the time in a dictionary, going from place to place, and you never really seem to establish what meaning is. And language and sort of understanding and shared understanding and discourse is kind of like that. It's very difficult to pin down. So when you ask somebody, do you believe that a God exists? It's commonly known and it's commonly understood by people what is meant that there is some real entity and agent out there, all powerful, or some kind of definition which is probably going to be something that is beyond the material world. some kind of sort of transcendent being, or infinite being, or whatever, but it's going to be a conscious agent that really exists, not just in your mind, not as a metaphor, not as a symbol, but something that is really out there. Maybe if there's a supernatural realm beyond the material world, but that something really exists outside of yourself, which you're calling God. We all understand this when this question is asked. That's the question that's being asked. Do you believe in God? And virtually everybody has absolutely no problem, unless you're one of these smug superior agnostics that thinks they can sit on the fence. So yeah, it's not really a problem. It's never been a problem for me to answer this question, and people generally don't have a problem answering this question. But for some strange reason, Jordan Peterson has got a problem giving a straight answer to this question. So he says, what do you mean by belief? And then he answers the question for himself, and he says, well, a belief is something that you're prepared to die for. Alex quite rightly came back and said, well, although not straight away, he came back eventually and said, well, I believe that this chair exists, but it's not a belief that I'm prepared to die for. Well, good point. Yeah, so obviously Alex did make a good point there, and Peterson didn't really define belief, because saying that a belief is something you're prepared to die for is not defining belief in any sort of philosophical or epistemological way. That, I mean, for me, a belief is just simply being convinced that a particular claim is true. So, and there are different types of belief, justified true belief, that kind of thing. Okay, so anyway, then Alex went on to, yes, but you understand that when I'm asking you a belief on, shall we say, the resurrection, I'm asking you whether historically that this thing really did happen, and that if Alex went back in time with his Panasonic camcorder and he went to the tomb, and the morning after Jesus was crucified, and he was holding his camcorder, would he see a man walking out of the tomb? And Peterson thought for a second. He said yes. He believes that Alex would pick up somebody walking out of the tomb. I didn't think Alex really articulated this very well, or didn't really think this question through, because the problem is, who's walking out of the tomb? We're talking about a man just walking out of a tomb. It's not really properly framed, because, for example, it may well be that when Jesus was crucified, he didn't die, and they put him in there and he woke up the next morning. I would have put it a different way. I would have said that if I went back in time and I found the Jesus who was being crucified, I saw him being crucified when he came down from the cross. I took his pulse. There was no pulse. Several hours later, he was in a tomb. I took his pulse again. There was no breathing. I realized his brain has been starved of oxygen for at least 3 hours. Now, look, I mean, over 5 minutes and brain damage starts to set in. So 3 hours, there's no coming back from that. And then I sat in the tomb and I kept my eyes open the whole time to make sure that there was no switch. And are you saying that that person who I determined was absolutely definitively dead would get up and walk out of the tomb? I would have put it a bit like that to reduce this, because I think that Peterson probably thought, well, I can safely say, yeah, I think you would see a man walking out of the tomb, because that leaves open some kind of possibility that it wasn't Jesus, or that Jesus never died. Because otherwise, is Peterson saying that he believes in the resurrection? And if he believes in the resurrection, why is he not in a Christian church every week taking Holy Communion? Why is he not more open about being a Christian? So I wasn't really very satisfied with the way that Alex handled that one. Yeah, and then Peterson said something really weird about the resurrection. He said that he's got no idea, this probably happened, or this historically happened, but I've got no idea what that means. Well, I mean, why is that relevant? We're not talking about meaning here. We're talking about whether the resurrection actually happened, because the bulk of Christians are stuck in their religion because they believe that this resurrection actually happened. Regardless of what it means is not really the point. Alex has come over. He's crossed the Atlantic to find out what your worldview is, to what extent you're a Christian. Now, this is another thing because Dawkins stupidly said that. Okay, well, maybe not stupidly, but in any case, Dawkins said that he's a cultural Christian. Peterson has seized on this, and he said that he regards Dawkins as 90% Christian, just because he said he's a cultural Christian. And really, I believe all Dawkins meant by that was that he grew up in a Christian culture. He observes some of the festivals and holidays, Christmas example, Easter. Maybe he goes to church now and again. I don't know. But I wouldn't really put too much significance on Dawkins. I wouldn't say that Dawkins is 90% a Christian. How could you? I mean, where did he get that figure from? 90%. And that's something that Alex didn't really question him about, and which really Peterson did not adequately justify. And then they came back to, this idea that, I mean, for example, let's say Pushkin in Russia, Pushkin is dead, and yet he exists in the soul of every Russian because, Russian poetry is very important to them. Pushkin, I suppose, is their greatest poet, and Pushkin exists in the heart of every Russian. That's not the same. That's not the same as saying that a Christian believes that the living Jesus is walking at his side, is it? That's not really quite the same thing. I mean, somebody's eternal life does not depend on, this poetic phrase that Pushkin lives in the soul of every Russian. It makes no odds to Russians in that sense whether Pushkin lives in their soul or not. It's only a poetic way of saying that Pushkin is very important to, I don't know, the Russian collective consciousness because of the history and everything and their connection with poetry. So he's drawing, he's kind of, he's going back to this thing that we can say that something, that we believe in something, and even that it exists, if it's a symbol, if it's symbolic of something, if we can use it, if it's got some kind of utility, like we can live our lives as if there's a God, and that serves as a good foundation for morals and indeed knowledge. It doesn't require that the God exists, and that's the thing. That's what he probably didn't articulate clearly enough, that this can be useful even if there is no God. And I suspect he avoids saying that because he doesn't want to upset his Christian fan base. Because then the next question is, well, is that your position, that you act as if there is a God, even though you don't really believe that there is? Okay, he talks about patterns a lot. He comes back to patterns are very real. Yeah, okay. I mean, but the reality in a pattern, say the reality in I don't know, certain artistic patterns which we identify with, say in the world of poetry or music or whatever, or the way that we make associations in art, and we kind of internalize them and they become important to us, and that this is real to us. It's not real in the same way that somebody who believes in a God regards that God as real. That is something entirely different. It's a false equivalence. Okay, so what else did Peterson say, and what did Alex ask? Yeah, and then I don't know. Peterson seems to have this idea that anybody who has internalized some Christian values is like a Christian. It's like he asked this question, who is and who isn't a Christian? I think probably what he's getting at is that if we've internalized Christian morality, then we can call ourselves Christians. Is that true? I mean, maybe I've internalized Christian morality. I grew up in a Christian culture. I don't believe in the resurrection. I don't believe in the existence of God. I don't believe in miracles. So, I mean, in what sense am I a Christian then? It's a bit like when this Muslim came onto the line and said, Matt, you're one of the best Muslims I know. I mean, and Matt insulted Allah, insulted Muhammad, and dared the caller to say, "You're a good Muslim." We know what he means, that Islam and Christianity have got certain moral values, and if you internalize them, you're 90% of the way there to being a good Christian or a good Muslim. And that 10% gap is only the fact that you don't believe in the God, you don't accept the miracles or the resurrection, that Muhammad was the prophet or whatever. I don't really think that that's the case. I don't think you could. I think it's meaningless to start saying that somebody is nearly there in terms of Christianity if they deny the actual fundamental tenets that make somebody a Christian. Because humanists also internalize a lot of Christian morality, and I don't think that you could claim that humanists are like 90% or even 10% Christian. It just seems meaningless because Christianity has got so much baggage to it, and it's baggage which is connected with the supernatural. That's the problem. Yeah, so let me see what else. Yeah, so Peterson made this claim. I've written it down here. Christ defeats death and hell. Yeah, he made this claim. So he said there's no doubt Christ defeats death and hell. Okay. Uh, Harry Potter defeats Lord Voldemort and reigns supreme in magic. Yeah? How is that different to the statement Christ defeats death and hell? We're talking about literary characters, and we can talk about them in this way. So is Peterson saying that in reality, in that Christ defeats death, in other words, he was resurrected, as a story, or that it really happened? He didn't really make that clear. And Alex didn't ask him, what do you mean? Do you mean that Christ really defeated death and hell as part of the story and the symbolism that goes with that? Or do you mean that it really happened? I suspect Alex didn't ask him that, because then he would probably go down the route of saying, well, what do we mean it really happened? It's so frustrating. Okay, yeah, and then of course this is coming back to what he was saying earlier about Hamlet. Yeah, yeah. So this is the thing that Peterson said. Hamlet exists more. I think Alex brought up Hamlet to illustrate that, in some sense, Hamlet exists, even though Hamlet's a fictional character. And Peterson grabbed on this and said, yes, Hamlet exists more than you or I. What does he mean by this? That Hamlet as a fictional character has become so important symbolically and as a literary figure in the sort of collective, I don't know, consciousness, Western consciousness, that in some way it can be justified to say that Hamlet exists more than real people, just because Hamlet is such a well-known character in fiction and it's meaningful to people. Hamlet has inspired people in their lives, and in that sense we can say that Hamlet really exists. In the same way, I suppose, we could say that some of Pushkin's characters, Yevgeny Onegin, exists in the consciousness of Russian people. But this is evading all the time the main question that Alex really wanted answering is, do you really believe that there's an actual God, that there's an actual God out there? And I felt that Peterson, time and time again, was seizing hold of the narrative just when Alex looked like he was going to ask an interesting question. Well, Alex would ask a question and then try to follow up to clarify. Peterson would jump in and hog the narrative for 5 minutes. And consequently, it wasn't really going Alex's way. They got bogged down in, I don't know, a 10 or 15-minute conversation about the meaning of the serpent in Genesis. And at one time, I can't remember, Alex or Peterson was saying, well, the serpent could be construed as being Christ, because the serpent tried to encourage knowledge and light when the serpent approached Eve to say, go and take from the tree of knowledge. in the same way that Christ does that as well. So they spent like 15, 20 minutes on this, and I don't really know that that was fruitful. And I think that they went there because probably Peterson wanted it to go there, maybe because he'd done some research on this and he wanted to show off how much he knew about it. Okay, so what else have I written? Um, oh yeah, right. Yeah. So just near the end, I've written down here 1 minute 57 18 seconds. Yeah, because I was going to play this. So Alex said, looking really frustrated. In fact, I posted on my community um, board where I post photographs. There's a picture of Alex at this point near the end of the conversation, looking like, I don't know, looking like he's chewing a wasp or something. And, you know, he looks like he's really been through it, because he says, Mr. Peterson, I've come to interview you because I've been hoping that I could clarify and understand more about your worldview. And then he pulled this face, which was a look of utter kind of, I don't know, almost disgust or something like that. I don't really know how to characterize it, but he looked very dissatisfied when he said that. And he didn't really say whether, well, actually, after this conversation, I feel like I know your worldview much better. He didn't really assert that. Peterson then just said, well, these are very complex. These are very complex matters, and the more complex they are, the more necessary it is to talk about them with stellar precision. And I mean, that's exactly what he didn't do. He didn't talk about these matters with stellar precision. Everything was very nebulous and very imprecise. And as a result of this discussion between the two of them, which was supposed to illuminate Peterson's worldview, I still don't know, or I still haven't got a good idea about Peterson's position on the central tenets of Christianity, the resurrection, the miracles and everything, all the supernatural claims, and on whether there is actually a real God out there. I don't know. After 2 hours, I still don't know. Looking at the comments, there are loads of Christians saying, "Oh, Peterson was clear. He wiped the floor with Alex." And, well, I mean, in a way, he did wipe the floor with Alex, because Alex didn't really get his answers. So I kind of agree there. But no, I don't think that Peterson answered the questions that Alex was answering. But I think maybe Alex could have done a better job of asking those questions and arriving with the right questions in exactly the right format. But Peterson is so kind of cunning that he probably would have been able to deal with that anyway, and he would have created so many gray areas that nothing at all everything would be indecipherable. So I think that Alex was onto a loser there. Maybe he'll come back in 5 years' time and try, if everybody's still alive, and he will get some straight answers from Peterson, but I very much doubt it. Okay, well, that's my take. I'd love to know what you think. Okay, bye.